Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest episode here of New Album Spotlight, the show where I put the spotlight on a new album in progressive rock that I really want to turn your attention towards, something I'm really excited about that I think you guys will enjoy if you have similar progressive rock music tastes as me. And today I have a really good one, an album that's coming out next Friday that I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time. This is Cosmic Cathedral and the album Deep Water. And this group is kind of a super group of sorts in the world of progressive rock. Basically, for me, it's the next project from Neil Morse, who's one of my favorite artists. Not one of, but is my favorite artist on this planet. And I've just loved everything that he's put together and love his sound and his passion and all the different projects that he's been a part of. So this is the union of Neil Morse with Chester Thompson, who's known for his drumming with Genesis. Also Phil Keaggy, who's part of the group Glass Harp, who's also played with Neil Morse on different projects back like on the One album where they did a vocal duet, and Phil Keaggy has contributed to some of that material. And Byron House, who's a session player on bass, who's played with such luminaries as Robert Plant and Dolly Parton. That is the lineup we have on this incredible release called Deep Water. And it was really interesting when it was announced that he was playing. At first, it kind of started as him jamming with Chester Thompson. They kind of met up together and kind of were working out their musical chemistry and what that might mean and if it would lead to a project together, and it led to this. And a lot of these tracks came out of these different jam sessions with these players, and I think you can feel that in the music. It has a very jam kind of feel to it, like they organically came up with a lot of this material as they were in the room and as they were feeling each other out. And because of that, it has a bit of a different nature to it than a lot of other Neil Morse releases, where a lot of his releases feel very calculated, and he has a very specific structure and style and formula that he uses for a lot of his music. And don't get me wrong, you could of course hear that on this release as well. In a lot of places, you'll hear definite Neil Morse-isms. If you're familiar with him as an artist, you'll say, okay, this reminds me of this Neil Morse band record, this Spocksbeard thing, this Transatlantic thing. You know, of course, Neil Morse has a specific style that's all his own, and it's going to come across in whatever project he's a part of. But I feel like what's interesting is that he keeps trying to surround himself with new musicians to kind of give a different vibe and feel to all these different albums. You know, he's done dozens of different albums at this point. I don't even know the count. It's probably ridiculous. So it's probably difficult to keep it fresh and exciting and innovative. And I think the way he tries to do that is by bringing on different configurations of musicians to kind of excite him and keep him going in this musical landscape. He did that with The Resonance, which was his last project, a young group of Nashville musicians who really brought a new vibe to his music and brought a sense of energy and excitement to that release. And I feel like the same thing can be said here. We get a new cast of characters, and instead of bringing this kind of young, vibrant freshness that I think was brought in by The Resonance, they bring a more polished experience aesthetic. These are older musicians who've been in the business for a long time, and I feel like the album feels a little bit more breezy because of it. It's like these guys who know what they're doing, but they just want to have fun and jam and just play the music that they're passionate about without worrying too much about labels and about, you know, what people are going to categorize this as. And it feels like in some ways kind of influenced by like yacht rock or early 70s jazz rock in some sections. It's definitely prog. You definitely hear the full-on progressive rock influence, but there's definite sections that wouldn't feel out of place in like Steely Dan's world, or, you know, different classic artists of the 70s and 80s. I think that's a cool world that they're playing within to kind of give this a bit of a different flavor. But the album starts out with The Heart of Life, which is kind of your classic mid-length Neil Morse epic here. Starts out with an instrumental overture, not unlike what you would hear with Transatlantic or Neil Morse Band or even Flying Colors. A bit of a jazz fusion edge, though. You get a bit of a funkiness that you may not hear quite so prominent in those other projects, which brings this its own flavor and this its own style. About 4 minutes in, we get the typical Neil Morse melody with a bit of a bouncy, proggy flavor, and there's some great harmonizing between Neil Morse and Phil Keaggy, and it's great that they both have turns to do vocals on this album. It's mostly Neil Morse doing most of the like lead vocal work, but we definitely get moments where Phil Keaggy steps in and does some fabulous vocals. He has kind of a higher range vocal, which is a great compliment to Neil Morse. Played excellent effect on that track Cradle to the Grave on the One album, so that's kind of a preview of what you can expect from the vocals on this record. A lot of big epic themes are played throughout this piece, never sacrificing Neil's melodic sensibility. Big soulful guitar solo about 8 minutes in. Phil Keaggy really contributes some interesting different kind of styles to the guitar, some more soulful sounds, not just crazy shredding and virtuosic playing for, just for showmanship's sake. It's very soulful and very tuneful, and he's very methodical about how he's playing his parts, and it's really a great style to complement this record. And we get that trademark Neil reprise in glorious fashion at the end of Heart of Life. Great mini epic. The structure of this album kind of reminds me of the album Lifeline by Neil Morse. And I think I have similar feelings about that album as I do this one, where I feel like it's a solid entry in Neil's catalog, but maybe not like a big genre-defining masterpiece or like one of the high watermarks of his whole career. I think it's just solid, really great songwriting, and is really going to impress the people that really love what he does. And Lifeline begins that album with kind of this extended proggier piece, and then it ends with this big epic, which this album does as well. On that record, it's So Many Roads. Here we've got the Deep Water Suite. And then there's a couple shorter tracks in the middle that have different styles, different qualities about them that are a bit more exploring different facets of these different musicians and what they want to do. Time to Fly really sits into a funky and cool groove, great killer bass line, smoky key sounds. A distant sax kind of adds to this kind of smoky jazz club vibe. This is one of the main tracks that feels like it could fit like in a Steely Dan sort of aesthetic. Love Neil's soulful vocal delivery and these cool backing oohs and ahs for good measure. You get some great horn sounds, some really cool, big, clever hooks. It feels like some of the vocal hooks wouldn't feel out of place in like some of Neil's more singer-songwriter type music. But this is just a fantastic track and a good one to explore if you're looking for what to expect and what kind of different feel that you might get from this record, how it leans into this jazzier, more fusion style. And I think this is a highlight of the album. Then we get into a very standard piano-led Morse ballad called I Won't Make It. Some beautiful accented strings, some beautiful climaxes with great emotional guitar work, and those strings kind of swelling to epic heights. It's a beautiful track. It's only about 4 minutes long. It's very sentimental, very heartfelt, and the other musicians kind of add their little touches to make it more than just your standard Neil Morse balladry. I really like it. I think it's very beautifully done. Walking in Daylight is a unique one. It's about 9 minutes long. It has a pretty epic proggy opening with some big synths that morphs into kind of a funkier, jammier direction with heaps of great groove. I love getting the chance for Phil Keaggy to shine as he does the main lead vocals on this track. A great jazzy piano interlude leads to a tasty bluesy guitar solo. We get the sweeping, swelling vocal section, and then it gets into kind of more psychedelic experimental kind of layers with some really cool bass work and some really great grooves, great guitar and keyboard atmosphere. It's just a really interesting kind of jammier section amidst this kind of interesting jam piece before we get back into that staccato keyboard riff and that funky jam sort of section. So it's a really cool track and another one that's pretty unique, not too similar to a lot of other stuff that Neil Morse does in his other epic work. Then we get into the big suite, this Deep Water Suite, which takes course over, several different tracks. I believe it's like 38 minutes long or something. So a lot to sink your teeth into. This is like a big chunk of the record. And it's beautifully done. There's so many different sections. They each have their place. And it's structured like your standard Neil Morse epic. But like I said, the other players kind of add their own jazz fusion tinges and different influences and things. creating a really great amalgamation of what this group can accomplish together. The introduction begins with this cool vocoder riff, which continues throughout this piece, this main lyrical theme, before we get into a more transatlantic-y kind of overture with heapings of jazz fusion groove and great funky bass lines, great proggy guitar and crunchy organ stabs over Thompson's pocket drum groove, just the band really firing on all cylinders before we get into Launch Out Part 1, getting the full vocal version of that Launch Out theme, some darker, heavier guitars interspersed with a bit of a bouncy vocal melody, but all with a decidedly kind of harder edge to it than what we've heard yet on this record. And that's what I like about this epic piece, is that it really plays with these different darker moments, but then lighter, more groovier moments, and it plays with this different range of emotions and things that the protagonist is going through as we go through this lyrical movement. Big symphonic prog theme led by keyboards is played in the last minute of this before closing with that vocoder theme. Then we get into Fires of the Sunrise, which is a pleasing acoustic guitar strum-led section. Very much classic Neil Morse. This feels like it could fit into Similitude of a Dream. In fact, we get some trade-off vocals in the verses between Morse and Kagi. Very nice effect. Almost has kind of this breezier Wind at My Back sort of feel, to my ears at least. And then there's some great instrumental interplay with the guitars towards the end of the track, leading into Storm Surface, which is kind of a 3-minute instrumental jazz fusion jam, a little bit of heavier edge in some of the guitar work, some great persistent bass lines, some howling guitar soloing, full of emotion and bluesy quality, but never sacrificing kind of the cool proggy nature of this kind of stormy sort of instrumental section. Then we get into Nightmare in Paradise, which is a really cool, dramatic, kind of cinematic feel, really cool laid back vibe with some piano touches over that cool bass line. We get Neil's vocals full of tortured anguish and this angsty emotion in that strong chorus, a foreboding bass solo. Neil gives this kind of darker tinged spoken word style section. There's a cool instrumental bit with piercing guitar and very busy bass work and screaming keys. Very cool and big and dramatic, and one of the highlights of the record. Just this really cool section. Before we move into Launch Out Part 2, which gives a different take on the Launch Out kind of vocal melody that we've gotten used to at this point, but in more uplifting kind of Neil Morsean fashion. New Revelation is one of the most fun sections on the record. Really great fun groove, keyboard stabs and bass interludes, giving a bit of a funkier edge, a great trade-off vocals between Morse and Kagi. It's just a blast on this record. You just have a lot of fun jamming to this one. I heard somewhere that they considered leaving this off the record, but that would have been a travesty because this is just such a fun section that I think is well needed within all of this epicness and drama that you hear throughout this big, giant piece of work. Great guitar solo at the end over this infectious groove. It's just really fun and one of the highlights of this track as well. Then we get into Launch Out Part 3, a reprise once again in epic fashion as we're kind of ramping up to this grand finale. We get a majestic keyboard solo closing this one out before we get into The Door to Heaven, which is like classic Neil Morse, just epic ending to a record, just like he's done countless times before. We get a nice calming bluesy guitar with Neil's soothing vocals on top, but it continues to build and get more epic as we reprise themes, as we modulate to different keys, as we get Phil Kagi kind of taking on the second verse and bringing it up to greater heights. We get some great guitar and keyboard soloing. We get so much great epic soaring of the music as it reprises and as the melody builds, and as we get kind of choirs and all of the grand things you'd expect from a finale before it all closes with that vocoder sound kind of closing this track out, bringing that through line that has existed throughout the track. So a fun record. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I don't think this is like a revolutionary record or one of Neil Morse's absolute masterpieces. I think it's just supremely solid, a lot of fun. For fans of Neil Morse, it's fun to see him explore with different musicians, to add little different quirks that are different from what has come before, but still getting that core style that you're used to with Neil, with his classic progressive rock work, with these epic moments, with these builds, with these structures that he's used to. Some people consider that Neil kind of repeating himself and not doing anything extremely innovative and different, and maybe that's a fair case to make, but for me, I just love it. I think it just adds to his signature style and sound, And this is just a fun record to enjoy and showcases another fun group of players that Neil Morse now has in his Rolodex. And it'll be interesting to see if they continue and do a second record and how that would sound if they're bringing some of these kind of yacht rock, jazz fusion, different touchstones into this music even further. But it's very comforting record. I get that kind of classic Neil Morse that pulls me in and makes me excited. And then you get a bunch of new kind of influences to keep you entertained throughout the track list and give it its own unique vibe and purpose. So fantastic. It fully embraces its like Christian themed lyrics. And I think that works well for Neil and company because that's what he's passionate about, and I want him to continue to make music that he's passionate for and talking about things that mean a lot to him. So that doesn't bother me in the slightest. I think it's really well done, and it's just a life-affirming, positive, wonderful experience of a record, and I highly recommend it. Especially Neil Morse fans, they should eat this up easily. And for people who are just exploring modern progressive rock and want to try something new out, this is definitely worth your time and attention. So that's what I have for you guys. Another fabulous project from Neil Morse that I fully enjoyed with my whole heart and will continue to listen to and enjoy throughout the year. So excited for your guys' thoughts. Let me know in the comments if you've heard it or how you feel about it, if you're excited for it, anything and everything. Please let me know, and I'll appreciate that so much. So thank you guys. Enjoy the music, and I'll catch you guys hopefully in a future episode. Bye, everybody. Come down, follow the